How much do you know about binary thinking? I'll give you some background. Binary thinking is the style of thinking where you think in very black and white, either or ways. A lot like a robot. And it leaves little room for different ideas, thoughts, and perspectives. When your mind is closed off to perspectives different from your current one, things become very binary and black and white. However, there is a problem with that style of thinking, even though that's the most common style of thinking. It's a very problematic style of thinking. And the biggest problem with that is that the world is not usually black and white. Either or thinking styles might work for softwares and robots, but humans are not designed to function that way. There are nuances and feelings and many different variables that can change even the exact same situation from moment to moment. So it's important to understand binary thinking, as well as its effects and alternatives. Learn about the challenges of binary thinking, how it can hold you back, as well as the alternatives and more in today's talk. Keep listening to learn more. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Philosophy Podcast, a bite-sized weekly podcast focused on empowering you to think better and upgrade your life. So let's talk about binary thinking. You know how important logic is, right? It matters. Put simply, logic helps us make sense of things and helps us make good decisions. However, logic is not everything. Emotions matter too. Also, there is such a thing as being too logical. I'm going to tell you a story from my own life to give you an example of this. In my 20s, I was extremely, if not exclusively, driven by logic. Thankfully, over the years, I have evolved and I've learned to think beyond just logic. Don't get me wrong, logic is extremely important, but so are emotions. Life is all about balance, as I've mentioned before. And if you depend purely on logic to go through life, life will become harder. Trust me on this one. I've been there and done that. And for the longest time, I operated solely on logic and rationality. And that created all sorts of challenges, and it even made life unnecessarily challenging. For one, I thought having feelings was a sign of weakness. That is a clear example of black and white binary thinking in action. Based on binary definitions, to my younger self, feelings and emotions were not good things to have. Based on the faulty messages and beliefs I picked up while growing up, I used to think that having emotions makes you weak. At that time, there was no room in my mind for considering a different perspective. There was no in-between, no middle ground, no grey area, and absolutely no room to consider any other alternatives. Emotions made you weak. That was the conclusion of my younger self. And that is what happens when you think purely on black and white terms. But as I've learned over the years, there's nothing bad about having emotions and feelings. In fact, it is impossible not to have them. We're not robots after all, and denying your emotions and feelings only makes life harder, which ends up causing havoc and a lot of unhappiness and struggles. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of bottling things up and why I recommend not doing that. Ironically, suppressing or denying my emotions and feelings ended up making me weak, even though the whole point of the style of thinking was to make me strong. You see the irony there? Now, looking back, I can only imagine how much easier my life would have been if I had learned not to box myself using rigid binary thinking. I genuinely hope that you can learn from my experiences and make those changes faster than I did, because it's important and because it has a big impact on your life. I'll go more into the how and why in a bit. But before that, let me tell you a bit about 0 and 1 logic. When I think about black and white or binary thinking styles, I am reminded of the time I learned programming. To give you a crash course, the basis of programming relies on binary codes of 0 and 1. 0 and 1. That's pretty much all every piece of software in the whole world is all about. This makes computer softwares an ideal example of binary thinking. They either do or they don't. There's really no middle ground with them. Unless a computer crashes or freezes and is just being an idiot, but that's a whole different thing. In general, there's hardly any middle ground for computers, because that's not an option in binary logic. They don't have something in between the 0 and the 1. They only have 0 and 1. There are only 2 options for them in any given situation, and they have to stick to those parameters, to either 0 or 1. Yes or no. Either or. And that's not a bad thing. When it comes to computers or robots and softwares and machines, that's not a bad thing. But it is not how we humans are designed to work. If we were, there wouldn't be so many nuances to consider. And the world would not be so full of oxymorons and contradictions. A really important thing to remember here is that humans are not robots. Humans are not designed to think like robots. Expecting yourself to act like one won't make things better, but can and very likely will make things worse. Like what happens if or when you go overboard with being logical. One of the biggest challenges of binary thinking is that it can stop you from considering all the facets and options in any given situation. Binary thinking can also limit your ability to see beyond the obvious choices or solutions, and that makes it challenging for anyone, really, to come up with out-of-the-box ideas and solutions. This is one of the reasons why flexible thinking is the cornerstone of creativity, while binary thinking can and does get in its way. Another crash course time. I don't know how much you know about artificial intelligence or AI, but the very goal of AI is to transcend binary logic. So AI basically exists in order to move beyond the confines of black and white, either or, 0 and 1 style of logic. Computers are very efficient and capable already, and this transcendence gives them the capability to be even greater and to do even more. This is what will pretty much define the technology of our future, and this is important. Just think for a second what happens if you think only in binary terms. And I'll use the example of a driverless car that's completely controlled by an onboard computer for this. So based on binary logic, when the traffic light turns green, you go. And when it turns red, you stop. That's the baseline. That's the general rule. This is pretty much universal knowledge. This is how traffic works no matter where you are. However, that is not a hard and fast rule each and every time. Here's what I mean. What if the car in front has broken down? Do you still go? What if the road in front suddenly cracks? Do you still drive straight on? What if a pedestrian is still on the road? Do you still head on even if it means running over the person? For us humans, the answer to these questions is obviously no, because we can decipher such nuances and adjust our decisions based on what we need to do at the time. So we can think beyond the green equals go logic. Just because the traffic light turns green does not automatically mean that you will drive on. But for a robot or a driverless car that is only programmed with the binary logic of green equals go, things won't be quite so nuanced. Can you imagine the nightmarish situation that can result from such a way of thinking? This is one of the reasons why, despite the massive developments in AI and driverless car technology, driverless cars still aren't very common. Because they still need to figure out how to factor in more nuances and grey areas. They have come a long way though, so it will be interesting to see how that tech space unfolds. I'm actually very excited about that. But coming back to the point in question, it's useful to realize that if thinking beyond binary terms is essential for AI and supercomputers, clearly it is important for us too. Here's the good news though, and it is that we are already miles ahead of AI and even supercomputers at deciphering and factoring in nuances. I doubt even the most capable and advanced AI technology will ever be able to catch up to the human brain's ability of deciphering nuances and grey areas. That said, most of us still get stuck in binary thinking from time to time, if not a lot. For many, in fact, this does happen a lot, as I've learned from my own past. So it is important, at least every once in a while, to evaluate the way you think and decide things. Because it is only when you examine your own thinking patterns that you will find out if you are restricting yourself with binary thinking. Another big problem with black and white thinking style is that it can make you narrow-minded. It can also get in the way of your growth and improvement, as that style of thinking can make you resistant to suggestions and feedback. Since you genuinely want to grow and improve in life, binary thinking style is one you need to avoid at all costs, if for this reason alone. But of course, there are more reasons, many more, why binary thinking isn't good for you, as you have already learned and will continue to learn throughout the rest of the talk. On that note, here is another one. Thinking only in black and white terms can make your life too rigid and restrictive. That can and does get in the way of your own happiness. I say this again from personal experience. I learned this the hard way, so I want you to learn from my struggles and not make the same mistakes I did. One of my favorite ways to accelerate learning is to learn from others' mistakes, and I want you to do the same. Treat this as a learning hack, if you will. Binary thinking will lead you to believe that a cup of coffee is either hot or cold. But that could not be further from the truth. The truth is that the cup of coffee could be lukewarm, or just mildly warm, or mildly cold, or at many other stages between hot or cold. On top of that, it can also be too hot or too cold. I'm not a fan of coffee that's scalding hot, but I have friends who only prefer it that way. But however you take it, the point is that classifying the temperature of a cup of coffee in black and white terms can be very misleading, because it's hardly ever just hot or cold. The same can be said about the weather. That'll be another prime example of the limitations of black and white thinking. Even in places with the most extreme of weather, there is hardly ever two states to their weather. Thinking that there is only summer or winter will leave you very confused most of the time, for instance, because you aren't taking into account some big weather patterns like rain when you're thinking in binary terms. Then there are times of day. Even though you can simply divide a day into day and night, that's not an accurate description of the time. It's too simplistic an explanation. One that can lead to confusion and even frustrations, because if you think only in terms of day and night, you won't factor in the phases of the day like noon, dawn, dusk, and so on. There are several other phases in a day, but the point is that classifying a day in black and white terms doesn't describe much and can even create confusion. This logic applies to pretty much every aspect of our lives, both the subjective and the objective ones. Binary thinking doesn't work well for tangible things, and neither does it work well for intangible things. Subjectivity matters, as does nuances. Nuances and grey areas in life might seem unnecessary, but they are actually useful, and they make life more interesting. You'll see that, if you don't already, that is, when you really start looking beyond the binary way of thinking. The world is full of possibilities and wonders. There are an infinite amount of ideas and options out there, and they only become accessible to you when you stop limiting yourself with binary thinking. When you do that, you start thinking more openly and start considering the grey areas and the nuances and the perspectives beyond your current one. Life becomes easier and better and more fun even. This is one of the biggest reasons why keeping your mind open is a good thing, as being open-minded helps you see the grey areas and helps you take into account the nuances and subjective factors. Speaking from personal experience, I missed out on having fun for far too long because of the binary way of thinking I had in the past. I have no regrets though, because those experiences helped me learn what not to do and helped me know firsthand what does not help, which now helps me help myself and help others. And I really hope you're learning at least something of value from this. In terms of our usual thinking style, some of you are better than others at thinking in non-rigid and flexible ways, and that's great. Of course, too much of that isn't good either, since life is all about balance and harmony, and logic has its place too. That being able to see beyond the confines of binary thinking opens your world up, and that is a great starting point, at the very least. So for those of you who are already good at thinking beyond the confines of binary logic, feel free to share any tips or suggestions you might have for thinking in non-rigid ways. As for those of you who are like my younger self and stuck in a binary way of thinking, keep stretching the boundaries of your way of thinking. Your thinking mode is like a rubber band. Try to stretch it too fast and too far, and it might just snap back in its original state. But if you keep consistently stretching yourself, over time you will be able to see more perspectives and possibilities and nuances, and the boundaries of your logical mind will expand. Just like how a rubber band expands if you keep stretching it consistently. Now, this talk has been going on longer than I expected, so it's time to bring it to a close. Before I end though, I'll leave you with one more benefit of becoming flexible and why it is better for you not to think only in binary black and white terms. This one can make a huge difference in your life, so listen closely. The more flexible you are in terms of your thinking, the easier it gets to adapt to things, see the grey areas, read in between the lines, and so on. Being flexible makes you more capable of exploring the possibilities and opportunities that are all around you, and makes it more possible for you to enjoy life. That's a great benefit, won't you say? Here is the bottom line. Binary thinking might seem like the only logical, rational way of thinking, but that could not be further from the truth. Humans are designed to have emotions and feelings. It's part of our core programming. Also, the world is full of nuances, so thinking only in binary terms not only is restrictive, it also makes you miss out on things and even makes life more of a struggle than it needs to be. At the end of the day, we are not robots, and trying to think like one only makes things harder. So stretch the confines of your logical mind. Learn from my struggles and challenges if it helps, and don't think in binary terms only. Because both humans and the world are far more nuanced and complicated than just green equals go. Adopt a flexible, open, and non-rigid style of thinking because it makes life easier. Do it because it helps you experience more. Do it because it empowers you to learn more. Do it because it enables you to make better decisions. And also do it because insisting on black and white and binary thinking styles can and does create incorrect conclusions, flawed assumptions, and even dangerous ends. It's smarter to consider the grey areas in life because, let's face it, life is rarely ever simply either or constructs. Quite the opposite, in fact, as life nearly always is about the grey areas and the nuances. And the best, if not the only way to notice them and work with them is to be open-minded and not get hung up on green always equals go type of binary thinking. Think smarter, be more open-minded, and consider the grey areas. Become more flexible and non-rigid. Your future self will thank you when you do.